are watching a Film Theory Masterclass. Welcome back to Film Theory. Today we are presenting our first Film Theory Masterclass. Discussing how cinema evolved from simple entertainment into one of the most powerful psychological and cultural tools ever created. Chapter 1. Welcome back to Film Theory Masterclass. Today, we are examining a film that appears at first glance to be a coming-of-age comedy, yet underneath its humor, energy, and many cultural nuances and references as well, lies something much deeper. Rick Famuyiwa's DOPE is a film about identity, perception, representation, and survival in the modern world. More importantly, it provides an excellent opportunity to explore some of the more influential concepts in film theory. Because film theory is not simply the study of movies. It is the study of how meaning is created through images, sound editing, performance, and visual language. Did you know every camera angle communicates something? Every type of cut communicates something. Every musical cue also communicates something. Once these systems become visible and more accessible to understand, films begin revealing entirely new layers of meaning. To understand why this matters, we need to briefly revisit the origins of cinema itself. Chapter 2. Recap. Long before blockbuster franchises and streaming platforms, early filmmakers were experimenting with an entirely new form of communication. Filmmakers such as George Méliès treated the camera almost as a magician's tool, using visual tricks to create impossible worlds. Others, like Charlie Chaplin, demonstrated that emotion could be communicated almost entirely through movement and imagery. This historical foundation remains incredibly important because cinema was originally designed as a visual language. Dialogue came much later. Funny enough, more than a century later, audiences still process images faster than they do spoken words, statistically. That principle remains one of the more stable foundations of filmmaking today. And this observation actually leads us to one of the more important concepts in film history, the Kuleshov Effect. Chapter 3. Developed by Soviet filmmaker Lev Kuleshov, this theory suggests that audiences create meaning by connecting images together, emotionally or mentally, psychologically. A neutral facial expression shown next to a bowl of soup gives the impression that the person might be hungry. However, if they're shown next to a coffin, it might give the impression that they either may be sad that they lost someone, or maybe a crime element to it. This doesn't change because the image itself never changes, though, if you noticed. The audience, you actually created that emotional meaning. The broader implication is much more profound. Editing does not merely connect scenes, it actually shapes human perception. Viewed through this lens particularly, modern internet culture actually begins to look a little bit familiar if we kind of remember the impromptu nature of TikTok videos, the randomness of virality of Instagram, the consistency needed for YouTube shorts, even the memes that we see kind of floating around on all three. All of these actually rely upon rapid editing, juxtaposition, reaction shots, and the emotional association that the audience has with the images as well. The tools may have changed, but in some cases, unfortunately, the psychology has not. This becomes particularly relevant when examining DOPE. The film constantly shifts between comedy, tension, danger, music, technology, and social commentary. It's quite a lot. However, these transitions actually create an intentionally unstable rhythm, where the audience actually has to experience some of the same uncertainty as the characters do themselves. Another concept students should understand is Mise-en-scène. Chapter 4. The term refers to everything visible within a frame. So the costumes, the props, the type of lighting, temperature, etc. set design, or lack of lighting, I forgot that, there we go. Set design, use of set design, production, the color used as well, color palettes, color of the clothing worn, the actor placement specifically, who is being shown in the frame, who is not allowed to be shown in the frame. Every visual element contributes to storytelling. And so, with this in mind, let's consider Malcolm's bedroom. Before he says a single word, the audience actually has a chance to get to know a little bit more about him before he even speaks, just based off looking at his room. So think of the posters that you see on his wall, the music references, the vintage technology, the clothing. These visual details communicate identity, actually, without requiring much exposition or dialogue or really much somebody having to overly explain what's going on. And whether people realize it or not, everyone actively participates in this process daily. Bedrooms communicate personality. Clothing communicates affiliation. Cars might communicate a certain level of status, while social media profiles might communicate identity. Human beings continuously construct visual narratives about themselves. And this raises an important and I think kind of an ethical question as well. Just how much of identity is authentic and just how much of it is maybe ego-driven as a performance? This moral question and dilemma really sits at the center of postmodern theory. Chapter 5. Postmodern thinkers argue that identity is rarely fixed or stable. Instead, it is constantly negotiated or fluid between social expectations and personal expression, identity. And in viewing this through that framework, Malcolm becomes much more than a simple single character on screen. He actually becomes an example of how individuals adapt and conform and mold themselves to succeed, oftentimes across different environments. At school, he is able to authentically embody his intelligence and succeed. Around his peers, he's able to embody his authentic confidence. Whereas online, he's actually able to shape his own identity in an authentic way to him. And unfortunately, in dangerous situations, he also authentically survives and kind of shows that he can kind of handle his own in any kind of waters. And the digital age really only intensified these pressures, it seems, for Malcolm and maybe for us all. Many people today maintain multiple versions of themselves. Some have professional identities, I think like LinkedIn or anything on Indeed maybe, or versus your family identity, like your Facebook, versus your online identity, maybe like your Instagram or TikTok, versus your public identity, which maybe also be your TikTok or YouTube, versus your private identity, which is like, people who know you. And the line between the authentic self and the performed self become almost increasingly difficult to identify. This is where philosopher John Baudrillard's concept of hyperreality becomes especially useful. Hyperreality describes a condition in which representations begin replacing reality itself. Social media is actually the greatest example of this concept itself. People increasingly experience each other through curated images rather than through a direct face-to-face interaction. And this representation becomes more influential often than the person being represented. DOPE actually takes this concept and explores the tension that lies under that surface repeatedly by asking audiences to question who Malcolm truly is versus who society is assuming, assumes, or tries to say he should be. Chapter 6. Cultural theorist Stuart Hall argued that representation shapes how societies understand entire groups of people. Film does not simply reflect reality. Film actively participates in constructing what we interpret as reality, what we think of as real. For decades, Hollywood frequently reduced communities into literal, simplistic caricatures, stereotypes, and characters became these stereotypes instead of people on screen. This is actually what makes DOPE so significant. Malcolm is actually not presented as a stereotype in this film particularly. He is able to be shown as an intelligent human, an awkward person, a creative boy, a confident man, a fearful child, a funny friend, a vulnerable person, a contradictory student. In many respects, that same complexity becomes the film's most important socio-political statement. The historical significance becomes clearer, actually, when you compare to much earlier representations of characters just like Malcolm in American cinema. In regards to this, I actually can't help but think of characters like Urkel and Carlton. Both of these characters are kind of seen as comedic relief, almost made as a shell of masculinity, unfortunately, and made to be the butt of the joke while also simultaneously being the smartest person in the room. Both of these characters are great examples, actually, of this representation that we were speaking about earlier. Instead of how Malcolm was seen, both Carlton, and Urkel were actually shown as shells of men, almost shells of young men who weren't able to be seen fully as human beings without being categorized or caricaturized really into a stereotype. They even how both actually, oddly enough, had redemption arcs, or if you want to call it that, I guess episodes, where they kind of embody the opposite juxtaposition, or really not opposite, but just the juxtaposition really of what that would kind of look like for their characters to take the opposite stance of their usual character. And we see it actually represented pretty well with both of them. One of the things I actually do really appreciate for Urkel is actually that his father is actually really, really great at reminding him oftentimes. Same with the father in Fresh Prince. Can't forget that one, excuse me. Great reminders of, the reaffirmation, especially from higher, intelligent, affluent black men as well, to reinforce those integrity-driven values and for them to also be seen as fully human without having to sacrifice any of their emotional capacity. This complexity allows audiences to recognize humanity, and stereotypes, unfortunately, are really used as propaganda, literally, to erase it. And so another major framework in film theory is actually formalism. Chapter 6. Formalist filmmakers argue that meaning emerges primarily from the cinematic technique being used, meaning there's meaning in the editing, the lighting, the composition, camera placement, camera movement, the color. These elements are used to shape audience experiences as much as story or more than dialogue in some cases. Directors such as Alfred Hitchcock and Stanley Kubrick became masters of this approach. The low angle shot was often used to communicate power for a character that was shown, or the high angle shot was known to conversely or oppositely show the feeling of vulnerability, making a person almost shrink as you're looking at them. The close-up created a feeling of intimacy. We're a little close right now, if you can't tell, versus the wide shot might create a feeling of isolation. Notice, the camera itself becomes a storyteller. So this principle actually extends to color as well. And color is rarely accidental. Red is often used traditionally to suggest senses of urgency, danger, passion, or even a threat of violence looming. Blue, on the other side, is frequently used to suggest distance, loneliness, or emotional restraint, while colors like green can symbolize wealth, the color of money, envy, corruption, or artificiality. I think it's Mata Nui for Bionicle, the green guy, evil guy, green. The visual language of Dope constantly balances youthful vibrancy against underlying tension. And bright colors are kind of seen as a metaphor contrasting against genuine danger. And this contrast reinforces the film's larger themes. And upon closer examination, it also reveals, come closer, the importance of cinematography. So, Chapter 7. Cinematography is used to refer to the visual art of creating images through the camera, through the use of tools and, techniques like depth of field, focus, movement, composition, lighting. These choices shape audience interpretation. Negative space can create loneliness, while symmetry can create order, while asymmetry can create discomfort. What often gets overlooked is how precisely filmmakers engineer these emotional responses. almost scientifically in some cases. The audience may be led to feel anxiety, excitement, or even feelings of uncertainty without ever consciously recognizing what's happening to them. And this brings us to realism, chapter 8. Realism argues that cinema should reflect authentic human experience, natural dialogue, real locations, everyday struggles, and believable relationships. Films operating within this tradition often feel grounded because they prioritize human behavior over spectacle. And DOPE belongs strongly within this lineage. The environments feel lived in. The dialogue feels authentic. The pressures facing the character, for those who know the environment, also feel hilariously recognizable. At its core, the film examines how young people actually navigate through these systems that are much, much larger than themselves, that they have definitely no history with. Systems like education, or systems like finance and economics, systems like technology, data, race, opportunity, and what type of expectations are placed on you. Each institution exerts a social pressure that's kind of pressed on individual identity. And this becomes easier to understand when viewed through the lens of social realism. Chapter 9. Social realism focuses on how institutions shape everyday life. Rather than simply depicting people as heroes conquering impossible odds, these type of films actually explore how ordinary people have been surviving these types of things and these larger systems for quite some time. And that theme remains, unfortunately, deeply relevant to us all today. Perhaps most importantly, DOPE demonstrates that survival is not merely a physical struggle. It also is an educational battle, a social battle, even a psychological one, not to mention with the added pressures and social tension of digital pressure, as well as institutional, traditional pressure. This film almost invites audiences to journey along with the characters to explore how individuals maintain their integrity, to me, and identity while navigating environments that constantly attempt to tell them who they are without their consent. And another essential concept for students is diegesis. Diegetic sounds exist within the world of the film. Things like dialogue, footsteps, music playing from the speakers, the traffic noises. However, non-diegetic sounds actually only exist for the audience. So things like the background scores, or narration, or suspense cues. I think like the scene of Cars where Lightning McQueen, I'm pretty sure, never hears Life is a Highway, which is such a shame. It's a beautiful song. But the music becomes particularly important because it shapes emotional interpretation of the piece. And throughout history, we actually see that music has been used almost as a writing on a figurative cave wall to preserve cultural memory and history. Genres like jazz, blues, hip-hop, punk, mariachi, gospel, even polka. Communities often tell their stories through sound, long before those stories appear ever in the textbook. And this observation returns us to a much more larger, encompassing question that kind of involves us all. What is the purpose of film theory? Well, chapter 11. Film theory teaches audiences to become active participants rather than passive consumers. Instead of just asking whether a film was entertaining, students are challenged to ask the film deeper questions. Things like, why was this shot framed this way? Or why was this color chosen? Or why was this music selected? Or even, who is centered within the narrative of the story? Why? Who remains invisible? Why? What assumptions that we have are being challenged? What assumptions are being reinforced? What stereotypes are being reinforced? Why? I think once audiences begin asking these questions, media itself will become much easier to digest and to understand fully. Not just movies either. Things like advertisement specifically, social media, news broadcasts, political ads. I mean, we've got elections coming up, and plenty of podcasts as well. Not to mention influencer culture, which kind of also goes hand in hand with the podcast. Every form of these visual communications rely upon similar principles. And with that in mind, film theory actually becomes much more of a tool rather than something that we can use for academic analysis. It actually becomes a form of safety in the form of media literacy, a tool for understanding how modern societies communicate. And perhaps that is the lasting significance of DOPE. Beneath its humor and style lies a sophisticated examination of identity and what it means, really, in the 21st century. And this is a story that is very clearly about perception, very clearly about representation, also clearly about technology, while incorporating what does education mean and the value of education, and also not forgetting to ask a very crucial question of who belongs and who doesn't and why, and the ongoing challenge of defining oneself in a world that almost feels determined to do it for you, with or without your consent. Remember, great films are supposed to do more than entertain. I feel like great films are also supposed to teach audiences how to look, how to see, how to think outside of the box. And once you learn how to think outside of that box, the world never really looks the same again. But this has been a Film Theory. Get sued by Matt Pat. Just kidding though. You have watched a Film Theory Masterclass. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. If you enjoy this program, please subscribe and support our book releases and events. I'll make sure you got links down there for you guys in the description and stuff. There'll also be references for this particular video as well. There also should be some more videos to check out. Definitely watch more Film Theory, and let me know what you learned. If you learned something from this video, don't forget to share it. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you later. Watch film.